The first is aiding an insurrection. In other words, effectively helping and indeed encouraging the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. That is the first time that any president, current or former, has faced insurrection charges.
For the first time in US history, Congress has referred a former president for criminal prosecution. This is Donald Trump, of course. The Justice Committee in the House has recommended to the Justice Department that he face charges including insurrection. Of course, it's now up to the Justice Department on what they do and whether they prosecute him. Mick Mulvaney, former Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, who is also recommended by the committee to face charges, spoke to our own Carol Walker last night, and he said that he told Carol that other recent problems are harming the former president's standing amongst Republicans.
Every single day, there's another story that breaks here that undermines his support. Keep in mind, there's a lot of Republicans who didn't support him in the first place. There were never Trumper Republicans going back as far as 2016. And those folks, not surprisingly, are still against Donald Trump. But this week, for example, he released this non fungible token, these NFT trading cards for $100 for Christmas. And he got a tremendous backlash from his base. In fact, one of the people who was arrested for the January 6 riots and is going to jail made a comment that he can't believe he's going to jail for an NFT salesman. So he's making mistakes upon mistakes here, and it is undermining support. Yes, there's still the hardcore base, but even more recently, some of that base, and I want to emphasize just some, has started to scratch their heads and wonder if there's not a better way.
Former Trump Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Let's go live to Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Morning.
Good morning to you.
First of all, take us through these various charges that have been recommended by the committee. How serious are they?
Well, they're extremely serious. There are four charges which have been recommended by the committee for the Justice Department to investigate and possibly prosecute. The first is aiding an insurrection. In other words, effectively helping and indeed encouraging the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. That is the first time that any president, current or former, has faced insurrection charges. Secondly, Trump is accused of obstructing a government investigation, effectively obstructing justice, for example, by advising people not to accept subpoenas, by trying to hide or withhold evidence. Thirdly, he's accused of falsehoods, effectively telling lies repeatedly, specifically about his attempt to overturn the election of Joe Biden and reverse his loss in November 2020. And fourthly, he is accused also of defrauding the US government, again, by trying to block Biden's certification as president in January 2021, effectively committing a fraud by preventing the operation of the US government.
And as you say, these are serious charges, and well, some of them, if you add them all up together, could lead to prison time. But of course, this all hinges on whether the actual Justice Department will actually bring these charges. They are not in any way swayed by the House committee. Is that right?
Well, let's talk about where the Justice Department process is right now. Last autumn, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, finally authorized an investigation of Trump for possible criminal activity. That's being led by a man named Jack Smith. Now, we have the intersection now of the House committee, which has more than 1,000 interviews, which has reams and reams of evidence, which it will hand over to the Justice Department to add to what is being collected. And then the Justice Department will have to make that decision based on legal considerations as to whether there's a criminal case for Trump to answer. In terms of the political considerations, I think if we were talking at this time last year, even though the evidence was mounting, that Trump indeed had incited this serious attack on the Capitol, this threat to execute legislators, and indeed his own Vice President, Mike Pence. If we talked this time last year, I think the Justice Department would have been reluctant. However, since then, we've had wave after wave of revelation from the House committee, and perhaps equally important, Trump is weakened politically.
But
As you heard from Mulvaney, his former chief of staff, uh, the failure of the Republicans to gain ground in the Senate, indeed, they actually lost a seat. So the Democrats now have a 51-49 majority. That failure is largely blamed on Trump for supporting, pushing, and shouting loudly for unqualified candidates who lost in key states such as Georgia Pennsylvania, and Arizona.
But just finally, how much will the Justice Department be thinking about politics when it comes to its conclusions as to whether to actually bring charges against President Trump? Because Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is appointed by President Biden, who in all likelihood will be running in the 2024 election against Donald Trump.
Well, at one level, no, there's a detachment between Biden and Merrick Garland. The Justice Department is supposed to be independent when it carries out these investigations. The White House emphasized yesterday in a very low-key statement that the House committee had run its investigation independently. It will do so with the Justice Department, and I think that will happen, despite Trump is trying to accuse everyone of a deep state conspiracy. I think where the politics comes in is, and we've got to be honest here, is that every state attorney general, every district attorney, like the one in Manhattan that's considering criminal charges against Trump, or the attorneys down in Georgia, they have to consider the politics that when you swing at the wannabe king, you best not miss. So I think politically, they'll want to make sure they have the toughest, almost ironclad case possible before finally filing those charges.
Scott, thank you. Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin, on, whether Donald Trump could face prison time. That is what we're facing now.